Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Will Snyder. I'm a sales and charter broker with 26 North Yachts. This is our second webinar in our series that'll be taking place for the foreseeable future. Our webinars will be Wednesday at 10 a.m. So same time, same place every Wednesday, and we hope you'll join us. Last week, we talked about everything from a seller's perspective. This week, we're going to be talking about the 5 rules that every buyer has to know in this market right now. In ensuing weeks, we're going to be having a lot of special guests, and of course, we'll hope you'll join us for that. Next week, we'll be on to sellers. So this week is obviously a very different conversation than last week. Yacht prices are falling. There's no doubt about it. Of course, yacht prices are highly correlated with both the economy and the stock market, so it's no surprise there. One data point I wanted to share is we're already starting to see less deal flow as an industry. So March 2019, there were 1,800 boats sold in the US, at least that were publicly disclosed. This past March, March 2020, it was 1,300. And of course, a number of those deals originated before this current crisis. So what does that mean for buyers? It means opportunity, of course. And today is all about how to best seize that opportunity. And we really couldn't be joined by anyone better to go over that with than Mike Carlson, co-founder of 26 North Yachts. So in the interest of kicking things off right now, let's jump into that first rule, which is be creative with your offer terms. Mike.
Oh yeah, glad to be here. So yeah, I guess to start off, so as you mentioned, sort of the 5 points when you're in a position to buy something right now during this time. So it's looking at what will create strength to your offer and where the opportunities exist. The first thing Will mentioned is being creative with your offer term. I think a lot of it is understanding the terms to your offer in a market like this are oftentimes as important as the dollar amount that you're presenting. So terms may be a closing location. Do you have a trade to take in? Looking at when the survey is going to be, when the sea trial will be, personal inspection, and so forth. So trades, in a market like now, trades become pretty frequent or are oftentimes presented. So the value of the trades will come into play. But the terms you have, that's something to be mindful of. Is terms are very, very important at a time like this, and the timeliness of presenting the offer.
Got it. Okay. So, let's say you are in fact financing. Rule number 2 is, if that is the case, get pre-approved.
Yeah, I think that falls into a couple of things. One is that oftentimes people, especially in a market like this, will present them, in a conversation with me from a buying side, will say, Mike, this is going to be a cash offer. And thinking that adds a tremendous amount of value, which it certainly does. But the reality is, in our market and larger motor yachts, probably 90% of our deals during any time are cash offers. So having a cash offer certainly adds value. If in fact you are going to be financing, the biggest thing is to be pre-approved before you're presenting an offer to a seller. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Beyond the obvious is, one is the timeliness of getting financing. Now, I'm not a loan expert, and we have plenty of marine lenders that we can put you in touch with. But I would imagine that with all loans right now, there's a huge backlog. So getting financing with rates being, rates are less than 4% right now, with a 20-year term, 20% down is like a typical for typical financing. But I imagine there's going to be a much longer process. Usually it's a couple of weeks, depending on the individual, to get a pre-approval, but I would think it's going to be quite a bit longer now with all the SBA loans and so forth going through banks.
Got it. Okay, so get started sooner rather than later.
It's getting started sooner than later for sure. But again, I guess the point being is that in the market that we're in, sellers, especially experienced sellers, pretty much expect the offer to be a cash offer. And if you are financing, make sure you're pre-approved. Otherwise, without that pre-approval, it's really just like a wood you take. It doesn't have a lot of power behind it.
Got it. Okay. Well, before I get into our rule number 3, I do want to mention that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you're watching this. We encourage any and all questions. We do want to make this an interactive process, so please, hit us with whatever comes to mind. With that said, Okay, let's jump ahead a little bit here. You've gone back and forth with as far as the negotiations go. How do you best approach a survey in a strategic manner? Talk to us about that, Mike.
Yeah, so I think it's like for myself, where the value of a broker can really shine during a survey process is like if you look at most deals will fall apart at survey, and it's not necessarily that the buyer doesn't want to move forward. Well, and ultimately that's what it comes down to, or the seller, but it comes down to negotiating the survey deficiencies and really understanding it. So I think like for myself, whether it's making the offer for the boat or going into the survey, it's really thinking forward and having a strategy and how you're gonna approach the survey. So um, oftentimes, you have to keep in mind whether it's a brand new boat or a 10-year-old boat, there's always going to be a list of deficiencies that will come up in a survey. It may be 50, it may be 150, but it's really understanding using your broker, your captain, your surveyor. You have a whole team of people that are going to be working on your side. So it's using all these different players and really understanding what the deficiencies are, what's important to you, and what's not important to you, and how to best strategize to negotiate that with the seller. What I see, um, what will happen sometimes is that you have a buyer who's going to kind of be especially in a market like this. Say there's 100 items that come up, and he's like, "Listen, Mike, let's ask for $200,000 price adjustment, some really high, high number, and there's really only about $50,000 worth of deficiencies, and the buyer is okay moving forward with 50,000, but he wants to stretch and just try to get the best deal possible and put forward a $200,000 price correction after the survey items. What happens more times than not, that just aggravates the seller, and then the seller, it just sets the tone for the entire deal moving forward. So the seller's upset now, and the whole, and will either just walk away from the deal, or he'll be a lot less likely to negotiate because he feels the buyer's trying to take advantage of him. So that's, there's my job as a broker is taking the emotion out of it, understanding the importance, what's important, what's not important is the deficiency, taking the buyer through that, and also using his captain, his surveyors, and really, you have all these different players. And again, that's where the communication line is so important, because on the buyer side, you'll have a hull surveyor, which may consist of up to 3 people, engine surveyors, which can be 1, 2 people. You have the captains on both sides frequently, the brokers on both sides, owner, the seller, the owner, the shipyard. So you have all these different moving parts, all these different players. And it's really important for there to be one person that's really leading the way to keep that communication line flowing, and then working with the buyer on his side and going through all the deficiency list, and really coming up with a strategy on how to best present that to the seller, if in fact the seller loves the boat and wants to move forward. And I think it's not getting so distracted. And sometimes the negotiations on the survey can become so much like a business transaction for buyers that they lose sight of what the real purpose of them buying the boat is, for enjoyment and fun, and not getting too caught up in whether a few light bulbs are out or so forth. That can be addressed later on easily.
Do you see a difference? I mean, in this particular market, which is undoubtedly a buyer's market, versus a more normalized market as far as approaching the survey? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be different approaches. So, it's like if you're gonna make, it's like every buyer right now is going to want to go in and say, it's like, Mike, listen, I want to get the best deal possible. And it's like, yeah, of course, of course you want to get the best. And that's true for any market, whether it's a good market or bad market. No one wants to overpay. Everyone wants to get a deal. So it's understood, and sellers are very well aware that a buyer is going to try to get the best deal possible. So I think what you will see, obviously, are a lot of lowball offers, which is fine. In lowball, you may have some boats that are still, or that will be overpriced. So a lowball offer is justifiable to position the boat more in today's market, as far as what the asking price should be. But there's going to be a lot of like really thrown around offers all over the place with lowball offers. So what's important on presenting any offer to a seller as well is it to be a formal offer with a written agreement and have a deposit. That will add a tremendous amount of strength to your offer and make it a legitimate offer, especially in today's market. Because what happens in a depressed market like this is everyone starts just giving these verbal offers. And if a boat's asking 2 million, they're just shooting numbers out verbally, and then they'll say, well, just see what the seller thinks. And it's like, the seller doesn't even know what he thinks oftentimes. So that's why it's like, you have to really get something in writing with a deposit, because the seller, if I go to the seller or present it to another broker, the seller, until he sees something that's real, he more times than not, he doesn't even know kind of where he stands until there's something really put in front of him.
Can you elaborate on that a bit, Mike? It doesn't know where he stands. I mean, psychologically, what's the...
Psychologically, because it's like, this is a big shift in what the market is doing right now. So when you just verbally throw something by, more, the seller's frequently going to say, well, that's ridiculous and that's crazy. I'll never accept that. But when there's a written offer that's signed in front of them, outlining what the terms are that we discussed earlier, is there trade involved? Is there not a trade involved? Buyer has a 10% deposit that's in escrow. That has a lot more weight than just throwing a verbal offer. So that gives the seller something to really consider. And for his broker, for myself, is this is a real buyer in a depressed market, to take advantage, to move forward with. So there's a lot more consideration in the offer when it's formalized. Makes
sense. I do want to take a second to acknowledge the fact that a bunch of questions have come in. We're going to be addressing all of them when we're done with our fifth and final rule. Keep them coming. We love it. With that, rule number 4, keep an open mind.
Yeah, the keep an open mind. I guess the point with that is that when someone, I'll talk with someone and frequently Mike, I want to get in this market, I want a screaming deal, but here's my criteria. It has to be a 4-stateroom layout, the draft under 6 feet. It has to go 18, 20 knots. It has to have these engines. This flybridge needs to look like this. And they'll be like very, very specific, which is fine. But you have to keep in mind when you're looking at boats, when you really start to narrow down under normal circumstances, oftentimes there's really only 3, 4, maybe boats that will fit your criteria in a normal market, normal situation. So if you're really looking for that screaming deal, there's a little bit of a give and take, right? There may be a little bit of a give and take, not to say that you couldn't find the perfect boat, but it's usually going to take a little bit longer to find that perfect boat. Keeping in mind too, the average length of ownership is 3 years in our market. So, which is not a very long time. So when someone's spending 6 months, a year, sometimes 2 years, to own a boat for 3 years, and then more, and then usually they'll put the boat on the market, sell it, and then hopefully move up to something bigger is what typically happens. But for a 3-year average time of ownership, if you're looking for that screaming deal, you may have to give up a little bit more than you ordinarily would if it's something that you want to take advantage of while we're in a depressed market. You don't want to take so long that the market turns around and then you're in a different position then.
So, while we're talking about screaming deals, what are you seeing as far as current screaming deals? What's the timeline we're talking about? What can we expect in the weeks and months?
Yeah, this my take on this, and I spoke a little bit about this last week from a seller's market. My take on this is now the opportunities are going to be on the new boat inventory side. That's where I feel like the best deals will be currently, because no dealers want to get rid of their inventory. And boats depreciate, so and there's carrying cost. There's a lot of reasons why new boats, inventory boats, dealers are going to be anxious to sell them, no matter whether it's a huge dealer or a small dealer. People right now want to get rid of their inventory and free up cash and get rid of credit lines and so forth. So that's where I personally see there's opportunity now. On the brokerage market or the used boat, there's going to be deals, and there already are some that are going to start popping up. But from my experience, it's going to take at least another 3 to 6 months for sellers to really start feeling it, in my opinion, for the real deals to start popping up on the brokerage side. I think they're going to start trickling in now. On the smaller boat side, where I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, is in like the high-end center console market, the $500 to $1 million center console market. I think a lot of those boats are financed. The smaller boats are typically financed, or a lot more of them are. And I think there's going to be a huge flood in deals in the next 2 months or so in that high-end center console market. In the larger motor yacht market, deals will start trickling in. It's kind of like, well, it's like you start speaking with sellers, and a lot of people will say, well, I don't need to sell, which is fine, but there's where the opportunity is for buyers, there's significant carrying costs for larger motor yachts and the depreciation. So when you're putting those, it's not in the interest of a seller to mothball his boat or hold out for or sit on the boat until the market turns around. So that's, there will certainly, and there are opportunities from a buyer, but I feel right now it's going to be on the new boat inventory. There are the few deals on the brokerage side, and will be more to come in 3 to 6 months. I think there's a lot of sellers' attitudes will drastically change, in my opinion.
Makes sense. So listen, I do want to say to anyone who might perhaps be on both the buy side and the selling side of the equation, and if you happen to currently own a yacht, you can find our last webinar on our YouTube channel, as well as this one. We'll be posting all of them right there. So that does bring us to our fifth and final rule, perhaps the golden rule, and that is be prepared to act quickly.
Yeah, so be prepared to act quickly. I think that's something that so again, in my experience when talking with a buyer, or even myself, I buy and sell boats, through our company as well. And I think the biggest thing to be mindful of is, if you really are looking for that screaming deal, you need to be able to act quickly. And it's not for everyone. So when I say quickly, typically the best deals that come up are deals that you have to make a decision in a very short amount of time. So again, speaking on my experience, the boats that I've bought for very good deals, I needed to make a decision usually within like a 24-hour period. So with me, I have the experience where I don't need to, it's like, I know if it's a good deal, I can walk and see on the boat and look at the engine room. If the engine room's well maintained, that typically means, it's an indicator that the boat overall has been well maintained. If the engine rooms are rust bucket, that's, giving an idea on how the overall condition of the boat is. But the point being is that when a deal is presented, is if you come to me and we have a boat that is in mind, and I say, Will, this is the opportunity. You need to make an offer right now, and you need to be prepared to close like tomorrow or in 2 days. And we'll work through the survey. We may have to even do that a little bit later on, but here's your opportunity. And it's not for everyone. And that's where, if the boat's still around in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, then it may still be a deal, but it's not like that screaming deal. So the point being is that for those screaming deals, you got to be ready to act quickly. And it's, again, it may not be for everyone, because it takes you have to have the expertise and know what you're really looking at to be comfortable. But it's something that has to be done quickly for that like real screaming deal is, I'm talking about. And Will, maybe, it sounds like it's not for you, Will.
It might not be. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Move.
All right. Well, that's a good segue into our first Q&A question. What's a would you take? That question is from Nicholas. What's a would you take?
A would you take is exactly what it is. Like, would you take $2 million when a boat's asking $3.5 million? So that's like a verbal, just would you take. It means, and we, in this kind of a market, again, people will start giving these verbal would you takes all the time. So that's what we call it. We'll, tell us a seller, or if we're talking with someone, it's a would you take. And say that by chance the seller says, yeah, I'll accept that. And then the buyer is like, oh my, then it sort of sets, then it's like, oh, he actually will take that. And then he starts backtracking, and then starts putting in crazy terms, and it's a 4-month closing. So that's why it's like, would you take verbal offers really have very little value, if not zero value, just because it is what you just said. It's a would you take offer.
Is there a scenario in which you would transmit a would you take offer?
We'll transmit, by law, legally we have to present all offers to a seller. So, we'll put it forward to a seller, but it won't do, it'll do the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. Again, going back to like why it's so important to define what your terms are in negotiating. It's would you take offers. It's just that's kind of like a rookie move on presenting an offer to a seller. It's not an effective way to get a deal.
We've got an interesting second question from Jorge. How do you see trade value shifting in uncertain yacht prices down the road? So I guess how are trades going to be valued differently?
I think depending on who it is, so that's a good question, Jorge. I think that trade values, because of there's depending on who you're negotiating with as well. If you're dealing with a private seller versus a dealer, it's I think there's going to be a little bit of a difference there. But trade values, a lot of times people want wholesale value for their trade, or they want wholesale value for the boat they're buying, and then they want full retail value for their trade. So that's something to keep in mind. It's like if you're trying to get wholesale on the boat you're buying, you're not going to, more times than not, you're not going to get or retail or wholesale on the trade. But what's in the difference in a market like this is that I think a trade will kind of cheapen the offer, just given that there is so much, there's more uncertainty. And it's another carrying cost the seller is going to have to deal with, whether it's whoever it is. But if you're buying a $2 million boat and you have a $300,000 trade, that would most likely be interesting to a seller because of the carrying costs and the values and so forth. So trades will, there's going to be a lot of trade deals going on, and we do see that in depressed markets where there's more trades than typical. I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think it's very solid. Stephen wants to know, are we in a relatively short window of opportunity, or do you expect prices to stay low for 12 plus months?
I mean, I think it's a hard question to ask. From my own opinion, I think prices will be low for the next 12 months, if not longer. I think that in the next 3 to 6 months, we'll start seeing the real opportunities, many more opportunities presenting themselves. But I do feel like the prices will be low. Will become, again, 3 to 6 months, the prices will really start to come down, and will continue to be more opportunities for the next year or so. That's in my opinion. I think it's going to be a longer time period than people realize, and the impact that this is going to have on the marine industry. I think there's still going to be boats trading hands, and there's still going to be sales happening, but the values will start coming down, certainly in the next few months, more so than they even are right now.
So Josh wants to circle back to our first rule that we talked about as far as offer terms. What terms would make a strong offer, and what would weaken the offer?
It's a good question, Josh. So the standard terms, for one, the length of the agreement from the time you make an offer to the time you close, a standard term is a 30-day time period. So anything beyond 30 days, that's going to be perceived from a seller standpoint is a longer closing than normal. A short closing would say between 2 to 3 weeks. Oftentimes, just the paperwork from how the boat's being documented or flagged, it's not even possible to close on a boat in a shorter window than 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the size and going through surveys and so forth. So the length is part of the term. If there's a trade involved, that'll weaken or strengthen your offer. Again, the financing pre-approval, where the boat's going to be physically closing, the survey going, negotiating through the survey. So that's all part of different terms that may play into the deal.
Got it. Ben has an age-old question. He says, I have purchased many boats and never put up a deposit. Is a deposit really that important?
In our market, it is. So it's I think especially when you're in a depressed market, and what will happen, Ben, is that a lot more people will start doing verbal offers. And I'm not saying that it's required. You don't have to have a deposit, but it does definitely adds value and adds strength to your offer. So, you can certainly, just like in your experience, you bought boats without putting a deposit down initially, but it does add strength, especially in this type of a market, to your offer, because there's going to be a lot of people going around giving would you takes and verbal offers and backtracking, and a lot of crazy deals will start popping up. But the point being is that, having a deposit does add value. And keeping in mind too, your deposit is 100% refundable after the survey sea trial, until you've signed what's called an acceptance of vessel, which Ben, you would have done with your experience in buying boats. But if at any point going through the survey that you're not interested in moving forward, your deposit, it goes into an escrow account that's regulated by the state of Florida. So if at any point you're not comfortable moving forward, your deposit's 100% refundable. So there's really no downside on putting forward a deposit. It only strengthens your offer.
Question from Andrew, an interesting one. If this crisis is over in 4 months, why would there be a flood of deals in 6 months?
Well, I don't think the crisis is going to be over in 4 months, is my opinion. So I think just that if it's over in 4 months and everything's back to normal, then there may not. I just don't think that's the reality of it. I think it's even shutting down the economy in I'm speaking just within the marine industry for this short, 3-4 weeks, whatever it's been today, is going to have a lasting impact for the rest of the year, with shipyards closing down, with inventory. So it's already had a huge impact on the marine industry as it is. So I just don't, it's not where it's just going to all of a sudden be back to normal in 4 months from now, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got another question from Steven, a very topical one. What if the deal in question is in another state? There's little ability to travel. How can you make the decision quickly in this environment where we are restricted?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Stephen. So I think what I would do is find a local surveyor. Say the boat is in Maryland, or if it's in Rhode Island, is find a local surveyor let's use like Newport, Rhode Island, for example. If a boat's in Newport, Rhode Island, find a local surveyor, do a pre-inspection on the boat for you. So not doing a full survey quite just yet. Have him go through the boat, take a bunch of photos, and have him give you feedback on like what his general feeling is of the boat. He can take video and so forth. And if you're still comfortable from there, and it's the same thing with us as brokers, is like a lot of times even now we'll do Zoom calls or FaceTime while we're on the boat, have a lot more virtual tours, but find a local surveyor, do an initial walkthrough, have him give you feedback. If you're still comfortable, then have him proceed, obviously with an offer, but proceed with like a full survey. But finding a local surveyor to do that initial inspection can be a good idea in a time like this when you're not able to travel to go see a boat.
All right, we're coming up to our final question here from Jorge again. Thank you, Jorge. Do you see current yacht owners wanting to take those screaming deals, or do they have a more conservative attitude at this point? That really touches on what we discussed last week.
Seeing a current.
So basically, are right now, do you find sellers, willing to sell at what would constitute a screaming deal price?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's gonna, it's no, similar to real estate. I guess the only difference is with boats are always depreciating. They'll never, they'll typically very rarely ever appreciate. So with us, a lot of that is going to depend on the seller's personal circumstances. He may, not necessarily be ready to blow the boat out necessarily if he doesn't need to. But that's not to say the boat can't be bought at a good price for today's market. So, as some sellers will understand that, or some sellers may want to wait 6 months or however long to see how things change. But where sellers, what they need to keep in mind is that the boat's still depreciating and they still have the cost of ownership, which is expensive on these boats, between dockage, insurance, crew, using the boat, and so forth. But it's yeah, so it's really that's up to sort of depending on where the seller is personally.
Roger. Okay. Well, listen, actually, John has what will ultimately be the final question. It's a perfect pivot off of Jorge's question. If the price of yachts are falling, what about the marinas and the cost of actually keeping the boat?
Well, right now, there's a huge. I mean, I speak just on here in Fort Lauderdale, because the Bahamas are closed and the Keys are closed, and a lot of the boats are not moving right now. There's a big demand for dockage and space. So as of right now, the cost to keep your boat in a marina may not have gone down, but there's a lot of different ways to keep boats. You can keep a boat You can rent dockage behind a private house that may be less expensive if you don't plan on living aboard or having crew that's staying aboard. So there's ways that we can help you out with keeping, and that's something that we'll touch on next week as well, is how to minimize the cost of ownership. But as far as marinas go, I haven't seen the rates drop at marinas specifically, just because there's a high demand for dockage with a lot of boats being not able to go to the Bahamas and so forth.
Okay, great. Well, it's a perfect way to wrap things up. You've already previewed us for next week, how to minimize costs if you're a seller. Wednesdays at 10 a.m. You can catch all of our webinars on our YouTube channel as well. So Mike, thanks for going over the 5 golden rules for buyers. We hope to see you all next week.
Well, yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and yeah, we hope to see you next week.